Good morning, everybody. We are in Epiphany. It is Sunday, February 17th in 2019, and the text today comes from Luke chapter 6. It begins in verse 17 and carries on through verse 26. He came down with them and stood on a level place, with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power had come out from him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. For that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets." And there ends the reading for today. Let's have a little fun today. What do you say? I mean, the biblical text is just, it's amazing, isn't it? It truly is. There's hardly anything better than the biblical text to just mess with your head. So I'm getting ready to sermon prep, like pastors do. And I noticed my friend Robin Fig from England is here. Yay, dude, I miss you, mate. And I sure miss Elizabeth Cookin. So you send some love back that way to everybody and the boys. But preachers, they know what it's like to do sermon prep. And so you got to do context, right? And if somebody's very angry with me, I'm not sure why somebody's angry. Are we having problems here? That's really odd. Somebody's just putting up angry stickers. At any rate, it's like there's a troll in here. We have a troll. Where's the sunlight? Okay, strange things happen on this page, people. Here we go. So somebody's just holding the angry sticker button down. Well, at any rate, you look at the context. Of course, what's fascinating about the Gospel of Luke is the way he's going to do his editorial activity between the Gospel of Mark and his other source. And so I don't know who's got their finger on the angry button. I'm going to ask a blessing from the Lord for your heart. I don't know where you're at or who you are, but I must confess it's exactly what Jesus said this text would do. So we're getting there, aren't we? I'm going to have to ignore that, friends. Okay, here we go. So Luke 6 has a little something for everybody. So it starts off, of course, with Jesus going through the Sabbath and challenging the traditions of the leadership, and Lutherans and Baptists gonna love that text, man. That's all about the old law and this and that and the other, and tradition versus revelation, and there's all kinds of ways that they would use that one. And then verses 12 through 16 is the calling of the apostles, and you're going to be all, you guys you're the 12 and this and that and the other, and the Roman Catholics would love that. So would the Lutherans. Anybody that's part of a tradition that has an episcopate's going to love this one. Yep. Then you get from verse 17 through verse 19, you have all this healing that's going on. Jesus healing. Oh, the charismatics, they're loving this one. This is their text. And then you get to verse 20 through 27, and you got the Beatitudes and the woes, and oh, this is the progressive Christian text, you know? It's almost like you could just walk through Luke 6 and look at denomination after denomination and what they emphasize. And that's part of the point here today, is that this is a whole package. In Luke 6, when we get to verse 20, everything that's led up to verse 20 has helped set the scene for what is now going to be known as the Didache. Luke 6 is the Lucan version of the Sermon on the Mount, or what we know as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, but also it's a kind of a short form of a Didache that one finds in, for example, the little document known as the Didache. With this Didache, there's a whole package. So the first thing I want to observe about our text today is you can have your cake and eat it too, but you have to eat the whole cake. In other words, you're not allowed to just cherry pick stuff. You have to take the whole package. And so for the charismatic today, preaching on this lectionary text as though they use the lectionary, they would focus on verses 17 through 19, because that's what they're all about, man. They're all about healing everybody, and then you can bet you in the middle of this particular sermon, you know, the preacher do all the healing in the middle of church. And the progressives, they're going to ignore that. They look at that for the most part, you know, and it's, you know, legend or just the early church trying to make Jesus out to be more than he was. And yeah, he healed people, but he was using Freudian psychotherapy or something, you know. They don't really take a text like this seriously, that Jesus actually was a shaman healer. And so they're going to focus on what they would look at as the Lucan economics of verses 20 through 27. The charismatic wants to have all of their healing apart from what's occurring in the Beatitudes. And the progressive wants to have all of the social programming that they think they can derive from these Beatitudes and woes, but they don't want to participate in the healing. And this is the problem of Christianity. Because as you move through Luke, you see Jesus as a multifaceted character. He plays many roles, okay? That's what he does. As he moves through Luke, he plays many roles. He's a teacher. He's an exorcist. He's a healer. He's a riddler with his parables. He is also the rejected prophet like Moses. When you get to the travel narrative beginning in Luke 9:51, and it goes all the way through chapter 18:14, and it starts off with Jesus setting his face like a flint to Jerusalem, and he just straight shots there all the way down to 18:14 where he's in Jerusalem, and then eventually the Passion narrative. This chunk of text here that we're given, which divides the ministry from the Beatitudes in terms of the sources. You have Mark, and then you have, you have the Mark, and then the Hebrew, the other source, Q, the Hebrew Gospel, whatever you think it is. Matthew, if you think Luke edited Matthew, whatever it is, it's Luke's other source. But the lectionary brings both those sources together for us. We have to think about that. We have to think about that there is a real relationship to what Jesus does in the spirit world and the world of energy and the real world, the physical world, the world of the flesh, the world of economics, the world of politics, the world of sociology, the world of psychology. There has to be a congruence. Jesus is a healer on all levels, not just some. So we want to take that just as seriously as the lectionary folks did when they brought these two texts together, and just as seriously as the writer of Luke did when he brought these texts together. There is a Didache. There is a way of life. Now, in verse 17, if you read through this text, one of the things about reading through it in the Greek text is you notice there are a fair number of words that have to do with excess. Okay, great multitudes, big crowds, many people, all of Jerusalem. You get this language here in these verses that we're dealing with something large, big. Okay, big picture. And you have all the crowd getting in trying to touch him. For those that have done any work in healing, the healing arts, let's just call them arts. I don't know that we would want to call them sciences, partly because, never mind. Let's just say the healing arts, for example, Reiki, or as an example. You all know that touch plays a key role in healing. And there's healing without touch, and there's healing with touch, and they're different. And evidently, and at this point, this crowd is aware that it's touching that manages to change everything. Just got to touch him. That's all we got to do is touch him. And of course, we have that lovely story in the Gospels, don't we, of the woman who brings the essential elements for a healing together: need, passion, intention, and choice. And she just reaches up and touches the hem of Jesus' garment, and she's healed. And Jesus turns around and says, "Hey, man, somebody touched me. I felt power flow out of me the right way." So there is this great work that Jesus is doing. He's healing people, but there's this physical healing that's being done. There's this psychosocial healing in the exorcisms that's being done. It's both heals the psychology of the person and reconnects them back to society, psychosocial healing that's done. The miracles themselves, the healings that are done for many people who are suffering from diseases that would keep them on the margins of society, like leprosy. Of course, there's not going to be lepers here in this crowd. They're not allowed. They're on the road down there waiting for Luke 10 to come along. But Jesus does these wonderful healings. This is who he is. This is his ministry. He is known as a healer. And then there's a shift, and this is a very, very important shift, because the didache that's about to be offered is not offered to the masses. It's offered to his disciples. The text does say that. He looked up at his disciples. He's not looking at the crowds. He's not looking at human society. This is important, because we don't want to take these beatitudes and these woes beyond what they're meant to do. That is, they do not function as generic blessings and woes on human culture. He looked up to his disciples and said, he's talking about his followers. And then there are going to be 4 beatitudes and 4 corresponding woes. The beatitudes you're very familiar with, you know, and some of you are even familiar with the issue of translation of Makarios. Is it to be blessed, or is it to be happy? Are we referring, as some scholars put it, between ethical injunction and eschatological blessing? What are we looking at with regard to this text? That Jesus was capable of thinking in terms of present and future at the same time, because Jesus has a fundamentally different understanding of time than we do. And you can see that being played out in the Apostle Paul, and you can see it being played out in Christian history too. Augustine's reflection on time, and then in the 20th century, Paul Ricoeur. So that Jesus was capable of doing this is not beyond the pale. And this blessing, which could, in theory, create a state of interior happiness, because it is perceived as an eschatological blessing. It's a promise to be fulfilled fulfilled, but it is a promise, and therefore one can derive joy. Jesus says this blessing is for the poor. Is he talking about just economically poor? We do have the variant in Matthew, which reads, blessed are the poor in spirit. But in Luke, it's just the bare naked, blessed are the poor. Well, we know a number of things about Luke. We know one is he has a huge interest in economics. So much of what goes on in Luke is related to economic and political issues. And that's why in the John Howard Yoder in 1972 with his book on the politics of Jesus, which is an examination of the Gospel of Luke, ended up, I think, in a way cracking things open so that in the 1980s and 1990s, Lucan scholarship was absolutely overwhelmingly, I mean, you go look at the books that were produced in those 20 years, overwhelmingly exploring themes related to Luke and economics and Luke and politics. It's just stunning, Luke's interest in this. Does Luke think of the poor? Yes, he does. The economically poor, the economically deprived. I mean, let's make some important notes here. The 21st century in first world nations is not like the first century, and the poor of these first world nations are not like the poor of the first century. And I need to make this abundantly clear because texts like this are going to be used in pulpits around the United States today to justify a particular economic vision that Jesus does not share. Let me show you what I mean. First of all, we know that Jesus would not engage in violent revolution. So however he is picturing the reversal that is happening here in these texts, both the blessings and the woes, is not going to take place with revolutionary violence. In fact, it's the revolutionary violence that will end up getting him killed. That's Judas's perspective. That's what works. So we know that's not where Jesus is going, and therefore, anybody that says, you know, Jesus had socialist or communist tendencies, that is, that later theories of Marxism have certain parallels to things that Jesus says, that may or may not be the case, but the fact is, the Marxist system, the entire Marxist socialist system depends upon some kind of violent revolution and overthrow of the powers that be. Some will say, well, it doesn't require a violent revolution. And the answer to that is, okay, show me a particular country that has gone Marxist or some form of Marxism without violence. Is it there? Perhaps there are. Perhaps you could point to Scandinavia. I don't know. I'm simply saying that's not an option. So anybody that wants to use this text that way has already taken the text out of the context of the life of Jesus. Second, what is it then about the poor? They are the Anawim, they're the people of the land. They are the used. They are like the 99%. In fact, the 99% and the 1% that existed then exists today. That's kind of the most interesting thing. I just read that if you take the accumulated wealth of the 28 richest people on the earth, 28 now, it's 28. Last time I did this statistic a year or two ago in a sermon, it was over 80. Now it's 28. 28 people are worth more than the bottom half of humanity. "28 people are worth more than 3.5 billion people. That 1%, 99%, That thing just got so infinitely distant. 28 compared to 3.5 billion. That's a gap. And there's problems with that. And there's problems with people that have that kind of money and that kind of power. Now, not all wealthy people are the same. Look at Zacchaeus in the gospel narrative. Look at Bill Gates today. Not all wealthy people are the same. But there is a tendency to correlate wealth and power. And that's the problem with money. Money can buy you everything. It can buy you what you need, including people. It creates influence and it creates power. It is a principality and a power. And if you don't have a right relationship to it, you're going to live in an extraordinary excess. There is room for pleasure in life. Jesus is supported by wealthy people. They dine well. They eat well. They live well. He doesn't castigate them. He's supported by them. But there are always those in human society whose wealth is beyond measure and is totally excess. I read again a year ago that it would take about $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion to alleviate global poverty and homelessness. And then I read that there's $32 to $35 trillion stowed away in banks in the Cayman Islands. We have the solution to all of our problems if people would open their hearts and their wallets. It's right there. And that's the problem with money. If you hang on to it, it hangs on to you. And it grips tighter, and so you grip tighter. I used to think I was immune to this until last year when I was learning how to trade. Great skill, love it. But I didn't have a lot of money to trade, and so I was doing 5 and 10 cent pips. That means each time the tick went up, I would gain a nickel or a dime. Each time the little tick went down, I would lose a nickel or a dime, you know. And I had $100 to start with, you know, and by the time I'm doing the example, I probably lost half of it, so I'm down to $50, but I'm learning, you know. And I'll never forget sitting there, sitting here actually, in front of this computer, and I was in for perhaps 5 cent pips at that point, and I was down 40 pips. Then I was down $2. $2. And I was sitting here sweating bullets, emotionally, mentally, and then bam, it hit me. This is $2. Am I that attached to $2? And the answer was, you can be. And I learned a big lesson that day. Huge, very important. Just about how deep money had its hooks in me. Someone who does their best to think about these things and not get caught up in them. It was astonishing. When Jesus says to his disciples, "Blessed are you poor," he's letting them know that when life is tough and it doesn't make sense and things don't work the way you always want them to work, you are loved. You're cared for. There's so much more to this sermon than what the lectionary leaves with us today. It continues on and on about the goodness of God. And how we are to be merciful as our Father in heaven is merciful. Blessed are you who are poor now. Those of you that are poor. There's a difference between being broke and being poor. And rich and poor are also relative. For example, in America, the minimum wage is pushing $9 an hour. There are coffee harvesters in Central and South America that make just a little more than $1 a day. So a poor person in America can get a minimum wage job working at a gas station mini mart for $9 an hour and make $72 in a day. They're making more in one day than that coffee picker makes in 2 months. And a person in America working for minimum wage is going to make in a week what a coffee picker makes in a year. So who's rich and who's poor? If your needs are met, are you poor? Most of what I hear in the United States about poverty, and again, poverty is a real issue, but there's two types of poverty. There's the truly poor, the homeless. And then there's the societal poor. But you'll notice so many societal poor, they have a roof over their head. May not be a great roof, but it's a roof. They have food. May not be the best food, but they have food. They have electricity. They might have trouble paying their bills, but they don't live in tents. When you look at around the world, globally at the world, and you look at the homeless populations of Africa and Asia and India, and you have to ask yourself, if I'm an American, if I'm a European, if I'm an Australian or a New Zealander, if I'm in a developing country like Japan or South Korea, no matter where I'm at, am I not already rich in one sense compared to the rest of the world? If the rich suffer from greed, the poor suffer from resentment, and neither attitude toward money is what Jesus is advocating. Envy, which leads to resentment, and greed, which leads to a total lack of compassion. Neither one of these are Jesus' orientation to wealth. Jesus' orientation to wealth is such that if you have it, you see needs, you share it. That's what Zacchaeus did. And that's why Jesus could say today, the kingdom of God is in your house. We shan't want to forget that if the poor are blessed, and if indeed it's the hungry who will be filled, and if those who grieve now, for all manner of reasons, if they will indeed one day rejoice and laugh, we shouldn't want to forget that there is a fourth blessing, the blessing that, in a sense, grounds all the others, and that's when people hate you and exclude you and revile you on account of the true human, your willingness to follow him. This true human is the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth. All the gospel writers make this clear, as does Paul. This Jesus of Nazareth will be one risen from the dead and seated at the right hand of God. That is definitely Luke, certainly the other gospel writers, and Paul, and the Revelator, and Hebrews, and the entire apostolic tradition. You cannot deny this. It is this true human that has come back as the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. He stood up and spoke to his disciples. He's not speaking to the world. He's speaking to his disciples. It's the same with the woes. Woe to you who are rich and follow me. This is your consolation. All your prosperity gospel, your nice, beautiful 6-bedroom, 3-bath home with a built-in swimming pool in the backyard, your 3-car garage, that Mercedes and that great Ducati you got parked in there. This is your consolation. Your super yacht, this is your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, who don't think about the simple things of life, like a meal, who just simply take everything for granted, who sate themselves insatiably, like food addicts, who are eating machines, consumption machines. That's America. And you go to a restaurant and they throw 35% of the food they cook out in the trash. Woe to you, America. You have received your consolation. Woe to you, America. You will be hungry. Woe to you, America. You are laughing now. Times are good, but you will mourn and weep. Oh, America, and everyone speaks well of you. This is for us today. It's a hard text, but if we're going to follow Jesus, we're called to heal all life, from disease to the wallet. I leave you with this. The devil wanted to attack the Christian one day, so he put all his fiery darts in his quiver and gathered his bow and headed out, and he saw a Christian walking down the street. And he pulled a fiery dart out, knocked it with the bow, shot the Christian right in the head. I mean, bam, dead on. But the Christian had on the helmet of salvation and nothing happened. The Christian kept walking. The devil's infuriated, pulls another fiery dart out. Knows they teach about shooting at body mass at the police academy, so he aims, fires, hits the Christian right in the chest. Nothing happens because the Christian has on the breastplate of righteousness. Now the devil's really angry. And he comes around behind the Christian. He knows everybody has an Achilles heel. Everybody has weakness. And he fires at the Christian's feet, but nothing happens because the Christian's feet are shod with the gospel of peace. The Christian stands up, knocks another bow, fires a fiery dart to the Christian's butt, right through his wallet. Kills him. There you go. Cheers.